I'm going to combine two parshas that one we're going to read this week and the following week, because there's a theme that pertains to both. Parshas Chukas, there's a sequence that's described that Klal Yisrael is in the desert, and they don't find water, and they begin to complain, as seems to be the script in the desert. That every time they're under pressure, they come and they register it with Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's a late medieval Jewish philosopher and commentary, the Albo. He wrote the Sefer HaIkrim, Book of Essences. The Albo says that there was a case that they were making when they complained that Moshe Rabbeinu should have taken the initiative as the leader who has brought them into the Midbar. He's doing it according to the instructions of the Rebbeinu Shalom of God, but he's the leader. He's the man on the ground. He's the point man. He took them into the Midbar, so he's responsible to see that they have the minimal needs attended to, and that they have food and drink. So he should have taken the initiative to solve the problem, not, as it were, wait for divine counsel and direction to what to do. It's a midbar, it's a desert, there is no water. It should have been a reflex response. He should have jumped into action right away. That's what the Albo says. The other commentaries that follow the Albo, contemporaries and after him, critique this idea. And they say Moshe Rabbeinu always consulted with the Rebbeinu Shalom before he jumped into action. So this was no different with any kind of problem. That was his approach, and there was a reasoning behind it. And whatever the reasoning was, this case was not different. Okay, so that's the Albo, that's the problem, the Albo's take on it, and those who challenge the Albo's interpretation. The Meshech Chochma, that's the Osameach, Rabbi Simcha, in Parshas Chukas defends the Albo. And he puts forth the following analysis, a very, very interesting analysis. He said, why did Moshe Rabbeinu always refer to the Rebbeinu Shalom in every situation? Of course, he needed to know what had to be done, but in some cases it may have seemed obvious what the next step would be. Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely concerned that nobody should ever attribute the extraordinary events that are going to unfold, because have unfolded already, but now in a consultation mode, not to attribute it to him personally. So he wants to make it dramatically clear that the source of all this providential guidance, all these extraordinary events, is the Rebbeinu Shalom, is God. So before he does anything, even if he's confident that the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to bless his initiative and his decision in what has to be done in the solution, but he wants it to be abundantly clear, dramatically clear, that the source is God, not him. Because there's always a danger that people will think that he's so special that he's above being human. One time, Moshe does not do that. Moshe springs into action immediately without going to consult by Korach. This coming week's parsha, Moshe immediately says, okay, he tries to win over Korach, but not successful. Korach, Dosan, Vaviron, tries to win them over, not successful. And he says, okay, so we're going to have this test, the bringing of the Torahs, we're going to have a test which will define, and he sets up the parameters of what the responses will be, and that will be the definitive clarification of who the Rebbeinu Shalom appointed. But he, as it were, it seems he's sorting this all out on his own. He's not consulting. So how come here he doesn't consult? In the other cases he does. Because here, says the Meshech Chochmah, what's happening? They're rebelling against him. So here he's not concerned that anybody's going to overinterpret and deify his action. The best that will happen, he'll bring it back to a level playing field. Here isn't that problem, because they're rebelling against him anyway. He's going against those who are the insurrectionists. So this case was exceptional and different than the other cases. Other cases they complained, but it wasn't a direct rebellion against his leadership. Here was direct rebellion against the authority of his leadership, the source and the authority of his leadership. It was an insurrection. So that's why this case of Korach, he doesn't go to consult, he springs into action immediately, because he doesn't look at the risk of the downside. There isn't that exposure, there isn't that risk of the downside. Because anyway, they're in a mode of challenging him. So the best that'll be is that he'll correct that. But now the Meshech Chochmah says now he's going back to try and explain the Albo. Remember, he's explaining the Albo. What did the Albo say? The Albo said Moshe Rabbeinu should have taken the initiative. There's a case that the people had that he should have taken the initiative. But every time he didn't take the initiative, he always consulted with the Rebbeinu. But now, when is this happening? This is happening after Korach, after the story of Korach. So now, as a leader, Moshe should have anticipated that he created a new benchmark. He created a new reality. He created a reality that he did take an initiative. So now there would be, he has to assume and anticipate the possibility, or maybe probability, of the lowest common denominator response. There will be those who will say, oh, by Korach you took the initiative, because that was pertaining to your honor and your position. Now we have a problem, we're thirsty, and you don't take the initiative. Had the story with Korach not intervened, then there wouldn't be the problem. The problem is only a result of there having been the Korach sequence in the middle, where Moshe did take an initiative, and that allows for the possibility of somebody who wants to shoot Moshe down as being able to say, point to it, was that the reason? No, because Moshe in fact did get the appointment. He was carrying out his mission as charged by the Rebbeinu Shalom. Right? One of the most extraordinary things in the Torah is the Torah says that Moshe is the most humble of all men. Right? We had that in the Parsha when the Rebbeinu Shalom is chastising Aaron and Miriam for critiquing Moshe over there. You know, they critiqued him, and not rebelliously, in a rebellious fashion, but they did critique him for separating from his wife. And over there the verse says that Moshe is Onov Mikol Odom. Now who wrote that? Moshe. Now isn't that a contradiction in terms for him to write that he's the most humble of all men?
Right.
Huh?
Right. Not really, 'cause it's
The answer is we have a different definition of humility. Generally speaking, what people think is humility is if I'm the best tennis player in the world and somebody stops me to interview me and they say, well, do you think you're a good tennis player? So I should say, oh, I'm not that good. The halachic perception of it, that's nonsense. If you're good, you're good. You are what you are. What is humility then? Humility is the recognition that God gave me these abilities. And there are two stages to it. One is the talent that I'm born with, the inherent talent. But then you might say, okay, maybe there are other people born with similar talents, but they don't have the discipline and the motivation, the commitment to bring them to actualization. So that I did. The Rebbeinu Shem, God gave me the initial resources, and the second stage, I kicked in. And we say, no, that's not quite true. Because even for the second stage, where you, the I kicks in, I need help from the Rebbeinu Shem. Because I need help to maintain that level of discipline and commitment. That's again a personality factor. There's a decision that I make. The decision I make is I want to do this, and I have to keep remaking that decision. And there's no question. Some people will see it through, and some people won't see it through. Right? I'm sure you people have already come across in your lifetime people that seem to have a lot of talent that just don't do too much about it because they don't have the commitment, the passion, the discipline to bring it to the fore. A lot of people like that out in the world. A lot of people who have potential but don't bring it to the table. So even that, I need an assistance from God. So I'll just give you an example of what I mean. We have a few psukim, a few places in Torah where it talks about keeping Shabbos. And when we talk about keeping Shabbos, it says 6 days the work teosa or yeosa will be done. It's a reflexive verb. Will be done, will get done. And the seventh day, you should rest. Now elsewhere, there are psukim that say you will do work 6 days. But here it says the work will get done. Part of the message of Shabbos is that I don't do, God does. What do? I only decide. So that's not really doing. Because for me to expedite any kind of action, I need the impulse to go from my brain through all of the nerve cells, synapses, to reach my hand, to pick up the book, to speak. There are a lot of things that I am not necessarily in control of. Why do I say not necessarily in control of? Because unfortunately, if we all jumped into a minibus right now and went down to the hospital, we'll see people that are deciding it that can't do it because something is going wrong along the way of that complex system. Very complex system. So the Torah Jew has it like this. What I govern is the decision. But to walk, if I say that I walked across the room, I swung and I hit the ball, inaccurate. What would be an accurate way of speaking? I decided to walk across the room, I decided to swing, and God allowed all of them. I should describe all of the stages and phases of each interaction as each nerve impacted each tendon, each muscle, and then it happened. but it's a very cumbersome way to speak. So during the course of the week, I indulge in a kind of an inaccuracy in my description by saying I walked across the room. It's not accurate. I spoke. No, I decided to speak, and God allowed it to happen. Shabbos, by the refraining of doing those acts that we designate as constructive, creative acts, I then am calling attention to the fact that I don't do, God does. That's what Shabbos is about. The resting on Shabbos, there are certain categories of activity, and each needs an analysis why these categories of activity, is to bring home again this message. I don't do, God does. And Shabbos, by refraining from doing constructive, so part of the message is that the 6 days that I did think that I was doing, what was really happening? The work got done. Sheshis Yomim Teyosa, or Yeyosa, the work in a reflexive sense. It got done. I'm owning up to the fact that I didn't do it, because that's part of the theme of Shabbos. That's what it's about, to remind me of that essential message. By how does that fit? It fits because on Shabbos, I'm refraining from quote unquote, doing constructive endeavor. What do I call constructive endeavor? Okay, in each case, it needs an analysis. The Ksava Kabbalah, one commentary, latter-day commentary, 100 plus years ago, said that to change the state of something is what we call constructive activity. So we have to analyze it in each one of the 39 categories to see how that applies. But that's called constructive endeavor. Remember, in the room, I'm allowed to pick up a table with 10 people sitting on it. But I can't transfer this from a public domain to a private domain or the converse, because that's called constructive. I'm changing its state. Just lifting it up in the room within the confines of the private domain is not called constructive or creative. So it's not the caloric expenditure of energy, it's not the effort, it's what the Torah defines as constructive. Why? Because that's what creates the illusion that I do. And what I want to do on Shabbos is I'm taking a spiritual inventory and I'm coming home to the reality that I don't do. Okay, now it would follow from that, that it should be a heavy day, Shabbos. It should be it sounds on the surface to be an oppressive message, that I'm so limited. All I do is choose and God does. And yet, I think I know most people that have been keeping Shabbos for a long time, look forward to Shabbos with tremendous anticipation as a day of joy, and a day that they feel a spiritual elevation and exhilaration. So how does that fit with what seems to be a heavy message of how limited I am? Or the way I just described it, Shabbos, part of the message is my limitations, essential to the theme of Shabbos. I don't do, God does. And yet, I'm also describing Shabbos as a day of exhilaration. Doesn't that seem to be a contradiction? Anybody have any suggestions on how to resolve that seeming contradiction?
Don't you feel exhilarated when you are learning on Shabbos?
Exhilaration, because God gives you that decision?
Okay, we're getting closer.
I think it's just a balance. Without one, you cannot have the other. So it's kind of like...
Okay, I think everybody's going in the right direction. I would express it like this. Go ahead.
You remove
removal of that pretense.
I'm sorry?
The removal of that pretense that you have during the week.
I
do things. The removal of the pretense.
Right, removal of the pretense. So it's a more truthful day, which, by the way, is the way Shabbos is described as a day of emes, a day of truth. But I think we have to add on one more piece. If I do, let's say it was the other way, I do, so then I'm limited to what I can do. There's a ceiling at how much I can accomplish. If it's God that does, I suddenly blew the lid off. The ceiling now has been removed. Who knows what my potential is? Who knows how far I can get? Who knows what I can achieve?
But what if you believe that you could do everything, but you have God on your side?
You have decided that.
That's the point. That's the point, is that now, because it's God that does, that means that I suddenly became empowered. That is the point. Seems like I de-enfranchised myself, but I re-enfranchised myself with the realization that if it's God that does now, then all of a sudden, the limitations are gone. Who knows how far I can get and I can go. Because it means my decision and will, and God can catapult me beyond what seemed to be the limitations. Okay? So that's why it's a day, in fact, it's described as a day of truth. Day of truth, and it has halachic implications about the credibility somebody has for taking trumas amaisus, etc. So I'm linking this to the idea of man's doing, man's decision to do, and Klal Yisrael in the desert were on a level of what we call miraculous providential guidance. They were sustained by the manna, by the bear of Miriam, by the man, the bear of Miriam, and that was really the issue according to the Malbim and the Netziv and others. The scouts, reflecting the attitude of the people, were looking forward to coming in to a more natural existence. Because the higher the level you're on, the more is expected of you. And they were looking, and the real goal is to get to Eretz Yisrael and make the land and day-to-day nature work for connecting it to its source, to godliness. In a sense, I would compare the overt miracles to antibiotic. But you don't want a steady diet of antibiotic. You do want a steady diet of vitamins. Living in the Midbar was being administered antibiotic because the idea was to get to a natural existence. You plant your vineyards, you plant your olive trees, you grow and you do the mitzvahs in this land, which will then facilitate taking earthliness and connect it to its potential spirituality. Yaakov had the dream, you remember, that there was a ladder that was rooted in the ground, top reached to the heavens, angels were coming up and down. Challenge of the Jew is always he has to be rooted in the ground. We say use the resources of this world in order to attain to spirituality. You cannot skip over that step. By utilizing the resources of this world, then we are climbing up the ladder, and we have to be able to come up and down this ladder. There are moments of peak. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But it's not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur every day. Every day we have the mundane challenges of day-to-day awareness. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is World Series time, right? But there's an exhibition games, there's spring training, there's a season, sometimes a playoff. Right? If every day was World Series time, the World Series would be Ice World Series. Right? No longer have the all that drama and historic ramifications. It's pointed, I think that it was Rabbi Meir Shapiro that pointed it out. A man is a complex blend of earthliness. It's as if God took an angel and an animal and put them together in one entity and now calls it man. And we say you cannot skip the step of utilizing the material world. You can't skip over that. When Christians and Eastern religions that say spirituality is to reject the physical world, to become an ascetic, right? To become monastic, to deny the physical world. Because spirituality and physicality are mutually exclusive. They contradict each other. And the Jew says, no, you got it wrong. The only way we can access spirituality is through utilizing the body. You have to do the mitzvahs. You have to live through the mitzvahs. But it's not just random indulgence in the world, it's according to criteria. So if you eat Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah to eat much and eat well. The day of Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah to fast. So there's nothing inherent about fasting or about eating, but it's the context. And the context of utilizing part of the fasting is to attain to a level of governance over my physical experiences. I have to have sovereignty. I have to be in control over them. And just like we say leadership has to anticipate consequences, possible responses, I'm always in that relationship between myself and my body. My mind has to reign, but I have to know and anticipate. I have to think about it in advance, that there's a physical needs, there are hormones, there are appetites, there are emotions, and they all must be factored in and given room for expression. And the Torah we have a number of sources on this. Again, Rameh Simcha, talks about this in Parshas Bo, on the mitzvah Mishvul Kru, to take the same lamb that was used for idolatry by the Egyptians, and now you're going to turn that mistake on its head and use it for a mitzvah. You're going to use it for the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb sacrifice. And that becomes symbolic of the idea is that you don't deny the physical universe. He says over there, Rabbi Simcha, there's no inclination that a man has that doesn't have the potential positive expression within halacha. But it has to be according to criteria. What are the criteria? The criteria are the halacha that teach us what is a meaningful way of expressing it. I would sum it up like this. I would say that think of behavior, think of experience, behavior, as language. We know that if you speak incoherently, non-grammatically, you're running a risk of people confusing what you're saying. You don't know whether you meant past, present, or future. I don't know whether you meant plural or singular. It can get very confusing. And there are words that can be pretty contradictory. If you want to be coherent, you run a better chance of being understood if you speak grammatically. Now think of behavior as language. The Torah Jew says that if I want communication, successful communication between my body and my soul, I have to live grammatically. What is living grammatically? Living halachically is living grammatically. That's our claim. That it's a more coherent way of communicating between body and soul. Sulam mutzav alza, it's a ladder pinned on the ground, but it reaches up to Shemayim, and it comes up and down, up and down. And what did we say that the Albo, the Book of Essences, according to Rabbi Simcha said now, is that leadership has to anticipate problems, right? A new world order, because now Moshe Rabbeinu took the initiative by Korach. So if he took the initiative by Korach, anticipate that there's going to be a significant percentage, if not a majority, but a significant percentage. They're going to interpret that to its lowest common denominator. They're going to see it. What? That this was pertaining to you, your ego, when they challenge you, so you took the initiative. Now we're thirsty, you don't. Even though every other time you didn't. But now something new a new variable has been introduced. You changed the playing field. The playing field was changed. Then you have to anticipate that. Okay, I'll end with this story, which has various applications. Let's apply it here. There are good stories that can be applied different ways. Story is told, I don't know if I shared this with you fellas in the past. If I did, you'll forgive me. Story is told of a Jew, very thin, weak kind of looking guy, and he's wandering, gets lost in Irish-Italian section of Brooklyn, and it's blisteringly hot August day, and can't find any place to walk in to get a cold drink that's air conditioned, so he walks into a bar. Sits down at the end of the bar, and Irishman and Italian on the other end, and they look at him, kind of strange seeing this fellow walk in, and they're having a contest. They're taking oranges, and they're seeing who can squeeze the orange with one hand and fill up the glass, the empty glass, more with the juice. So they're having this contest. So finally, he orders his cold beer. They're arguing over who filled more. Finally, they notice him again, and they've been drinking all the while, of course, not the orange juice. And they roll down an orange down the bar to the other end where this Jew is sitting, scrawny little Jew. And they say to him, "Okay, Jew, let's see what you can do." So, absolutely nonplussed. He doesn't seem to be excessively intimidated. And he says, "Instead of giving me this orange, give me the orange that you just squeezed." What? So give me the orange you just squeezed. They give him the orange. They throw it down to him. He takes the squeezed orange, holds it over the cup, and squeezes it again and fills up the cup till it starts overflowing. They're shocked. They say, "How'd you do that?" So the classical answer is given is, "Well, I'm a fundraiser for a yeshiva." But I'll give you another interpretation. The other interpretation is the Jew looks at the orange to squeeze out the spirituality of every orange. Every experience, you recite a blessing before you taste it, you've given an orientation and a focus to the experience. Okay, now the very end. I asked you fellas one time, who was the first guy that climbed Everest? Okay. Somebody know? Okay, so one of the reasons to come to Osamer is to improve your secular education. First guy that climbed Everest was a guy named Hillary from New Zealand, very aristocratic, talented explorer. He also, by the way, one of the nasty things about the way that's reported in history is that he was accompanied by a Sherpa guide. They lived there in the area, and the Sherpa guide never got any billing, any recognition. His name was Norgay Tenzing, because he was just a Sherpa. The other fellow was a Caucasian, so he got more credit. That's one of the nasty things about history. But about 25, 30 years later, people they already were climbing Everest, and they found the body on a slope of the first man who had tried to climb Everest, who never made it down, a guy named Mallory. And the experts came along to Hillary and they said, listen, the position of the body indicates that he made it to the top and he fell coming down. So it could be you're not the first guy that got to the top, that climbed the top. To which Hillary responded, I think that climbing Everest is not just about going up, it's about being able to come down. It's a very Jewish idea, is that you have to know peak moments and then get down to the mundane existence where we have to use the apples and oranges, right? The water, the Coke, the single malt scotch, to use it for mitzvahs. And that depends on the orientation. It depends. Melech means what? King. Melech is an acronym, according to sources in the Zohar, for Moach is mind, the mem. Lamed is leiv, heart, the emotions. And the Kof is kaved, the liver, which is supposed to be the seat of the hormones. If you have it in that sequence, Moach, mind, leiv, emotions, kaved, then you're in control and you anticipate the consequences of the action. And then you can use it as a conduit, harness it, it's an energy. You can harness Niagara for electricity, but going over it in a raft, you might be in trouble. The converse, kalem, take the word melech and you reverse it, kalem is destruction. It's counterproductive. So there's a game plan that we argue quite separate from the question of reward and punishment is a sense of fulfillment of pulling the disparate parts of our existence, the angel and the animal, pulling them together to make them work. Okay, fellas.